Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would personally review this little video that I thought was very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video, once again, over the Saul Canelo Alvarez situation. And for those of you that recently have not heard, Saul Canelo Alvarez, his next fight is going to be that, I believe, in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. I believe against the British fighter named John Ryder. Now, some people, of course, believe that that personally is a great fight. I'm not personally one of those guys. I don't think that it is a fight that is necessarily in a great fight. I don't even necessarily believe that it's completely a B grade fight. Just my personal opinion. I don't think that John Ryder is a real great cachet type of excuse me. That doesn't mean that he's not tough. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have guts or that he doesn't have a lot of heart. But in terms of the skill set to compete with Canelo Alvarez, I do not believe, at least more than likely, that he's really going to be super duper competitive with Canelo, unless it's very clear that Canelo Alvarez has lost his step, which we will see in that fight. But anyways, of course, a very big fight ends up happening this weekend on that of Showtime pay-per-view. A really colossal fight between that of Caleb Plant and Mr. David Benavidez. Well, both Canelo Alvarez and Eddie Reynoso, they both have picked Mr. David Benavidez to beat that of Caleb Plant because I think they see the same things that I see, which is that even though Caleb Plant, he is a very good boxer, and if we're really going to go there in terms of boxing skill and in terms of certain things that one does more correctly than the other, Caleb Plant is probably the more all-around talented boxer in terms of skills than what he has over David Benavidez. But David Benavidez is going to have a multitude of factors, in my opinion, in this fight in order for him to win the fight. Very similar to that of an Araceli Lara versus Jarrett Hurd type of fight. And I had someone mention, I believe, in my fight prediction about the Caleb Plant versus David Benavidez fight. Someone said, well, you compared this to, the Tony Harrison versus Tim Tszyu fight, because I think it's very comparable. Is it possible that maybe this fight could end up like that of Jarrett Hurd versus Julian J. Rock Williams? It's possible it could end up like that. I just don't see it ending up like that. And the reason why that is because one thing I'll give Julian J. Rock Williams is this. Even though he's very flawed as a fighter, clearly, he did have a certain amount enough of guts in certain fights. Sometimes this actually got him in too much of trouble, like when he got knocked out against Jason Rosario and when he did not get out of the range enough against that of Jamal Charlo, excuse me. But he was willing to exchange with you. He was willing to stand his ground. Caleb Plant and Araceli Lara, for example, I'm not saying that they won't stand their grounds at certain times. Both of them have gotten knockouts before, and both of them have shown that they can stand their ground to a certain degree. But they're primarily defensive first type of fighters. That's just the main type of fighters that they are. So when you have a fighter that is bigger than them, like that of a Jarrett Hurd or someone that clearly is probably not really meant to be naturally in that weight class, and then on top of that, they're decently powerful, and they just have a constant nagging pressure style, I just don't think that Caleb Plant's going to do very well. I could be wrong. Now, my personal opinion, more than likely this fight, if it goes the way that I think it's going to go, it's probably going to be more competitive than the Canelo versus Caleb Plant fight, sure. Because in my opinion, Canelo Alvarez, he's an all-around better fighter than what David Benavidez is. But at the end of the day, I don't trust Caleb Plant mentally. I don't trust his leaky defense at times. I don't trust him to use his feet and to tie David Benavidez up when he needs to. And I don't really trust him after he ended up getting knocked out by Canelo Alvarez. There are certain fighters, especially boxers, who are never the same again after they end up getting stopped or defeated in that first fight. Had, maybe this been before the Canelo Alvarez fight, I would say that this is a true 50-50 fight, or at least somewhere around there. But Caleb Plant did get stopped against Canelo Alvarez just a couple of years ago from what I remember. And on top of that, like I said, I just don't think he had a very good showing in the Canelo Alvarez fight, just my personal opinion. But Boxing Ego, he had a video that I thought was very particularly interesting, where I could take a look at all points here. And, Ego, of course, he's had a problem with Canelo for quite a while, but I do understand some of the points that he is bringing up here. And I thought that I would pull out some of my perspectives about this particular situation. And a lot of people, of course, that come on my channel and they say, oh, you just sound like another Canelita lover, or you just sound like another Canelo Alvarez super fan, or all this other stuff. I've already told a multitude of people this. I'm not a super fan of any of these fighters. All I do is give my breakdowns the most logical and objective way possible. And I get some of these guys on my channel that tell me, oh, well, Canelo Alvarez, he's nothing but a hoax. He's just a guy that has the complexion for the protection, and he was just hyped up to be a great fighter when really he wasn't. Every time he stepped up in class, he got exposed. All this stupid shit. And that's not me saying that Canelo Alvarez has not had some tough fights or maybe even some controversial decisions. But overall, as a fighter, Canelo Alvarez is not just a great fighter, he's an all-time great fighter. You cannot have the names on his resume that he has: Danny Jacobs, Migo, Cotto, Sergey Kovalev, Austin Trout, Adesanya Lara, Gennady Triple G Golovkin, Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith. You can't have all those names on your resume, and there may even be a couple of others that you can add on and not be a great fighter. Period. Point blank. But of course, the big question is, if Canelo Alvarez said that if David Benavidez was some nobody, which I'm not really sure if Canelo Alvarez actually stated that, but BOXINGEGO is going to try and state that if Canelo Alvarez said that he doesn't really need to fight David Benavidez, then why is he picking David Benavidez to beat Caleb Plant and he fought Caleb Plant? I understand the question, and I'm going to kind of commentate on that in this video. But let's get into it. Let's see what Mr. BOXINGEGO has to say.
Well, Canelo Alvarez's team picking David Benavidez to beat Caleb Plant. I got something to say about that. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Listen, I had to make this video. Subscribe. Eddie Reynoso and Canelo payday. You want payday? I know that. Alvarez. They are both picking David Benavidez. It is fight week, by the way. They're both picking David Benavidez to defeat
I hope that Caleb Plant, just in terms of his career, ends up having a good showing in this fight. And I think that it'll be competitive. But once again, Caleb Plant is really going to have to show in this fight that he is going to have to show a certain amount of dog and also certain skill sets that I just haven't seen from him before. David Benavidez, once again, I believe that he pretty much is a light heavyweight fighter masquerading as a super middleweight fighter. And he's not the only one that's ever done that. It is what it is. There's been a multitude of other fighters in other weight divisions or even in that weight division that have done that in the past. But David Benavidez is bigger. He's the fresher fighter. I think he has the right type of style to beat that of a Caleb Plant. Now, I think that David Benavidez, when he faces an actual elite boxer, and some of you may say, well, what do you mean by elite? Because you called Caleb Plant an A-grade fighter once upon a time, and I think that he's an A-grade fighter, but he's an A-minus level fighter. He's on that same level as Jamal Charlo. He's on that same level as some of the other guys that Canelo Alvarez could potentially face that he hasn't fought yet, or Danny Jacobs, certain guys like that. Somewhere along the A- to A-grade level, but he's not an A-plus fighter. I'm talking about real A-plus level fighters. Dimitri Bivol, Canelo Alvarez, Artur Beterbiev. Those are the fighters that I'm talking about. Those are the fighters that I'm talking about, and I don't really see any other fighter from 160 to 168 other than Canelo Alvarez that could potentially beat David Benavidez. I'm not going to say potentially, because I might be going a little bit too far. Demetrius Andrade, or maybe that's of, I'm trying to think who else. Who's the other name? Maybe either a Demetrius Bubble Andrade or a Caleb Plant. They might have the potential to beat that of David Benavidez. Maybe Jamal Charlo, but I would give him a smaller chance because I don't think that he has the boxing ability of either of those fighters. Just my personal view. And on top of that, both Caleb Plant and Andrade, they're bigger than that of a Jamal Charlo, just lengthier, at least from what I remember. But in my opinion, when you're talking about a fighter that's around a natural middleweight build, the only fighter that really would stand a chance against David Benavidez would be that of Canelo Alvarez. That's just my personal view. I think that David Benavidez more than likely will win the fight. I think the pressure will be too much for Caleb Plant, and I think that he does have certain deficiencies, especially with that Philly shell style, because once again, a lot of these fighters, they think that they can just imitate Floyd Mayweather Jr. I see the same shit with I see the same shit with Adrian Broner. Adrian Broner a lot of the times does this stupid Philly shell shit, or he thinks that he can just stay up against the ropes and keep his hands up and go in that Philly shell style, and he just thinks that he'll be good. You can't just stay in the same zone. You have to move your feet. You know, you have to shoulder roll with it. You have to get in and outside of the zone. Sometimes you have to clinch with your opponent. You have to know when to strike back. And Caleb Plant, I don't think he's as limited as a fighter as what Adrian Broner is. I think that he's more talented, more intelligent, and more skilled than what an Adrian Broner more than likely would ever be. But at the end of the day, he does have certain limitations, and I think we've seen that in the Canelo Alvarez fight. Just my personal view. I could be wrong, but we'll see.
LaPlante, a mutual opponent of Canelo Alvarez. Now, at first glance, it may not seem like a big deal. Like, okay, Benavidez is a great fighter, you know. He's fast-handed, he has vicious combinations, he appears to have a chin, he has definitely a killer mindset. He looks to be in the best shape of his career. So, not really a big deal, you know. Some people are picking Caleb, some people are picking David Benavidez. However, the reason why, to a keen student of the game like myself, why this doesn't look right from Canelo's team particularly is because these are the same people who, for a while now, you know, I can't even quantify it with actual time frame, but for a while now, these are the same two between Eddie Reynoso and Canelo, and I'm just gonna lump them together as Team Canelo, right? For a while, they've been downplaying David Benavidez. They're saying, and I'm gonna say the collective, but between Eddie Reynoso and Canelo, they've said stuff like, "Who is he beat?" Canelo said, "Who is Benavidez beat? Who is he? Why should I even be worried about him? Who is he beat? He beat one guy, Anthony Durrell. Who is that?" You know? So let me get this straight. You've been downplaying the kid Benavidez, acting like he ain't ish, acting like he doesn't do,
Well, here's the thing when it comes to Canelo Alvarez, to the Canelo Alvarez versus David Benavidez situation. I don't think that Canelo Alvarez has really ever stated that David Benavidez necessarily is a horrible fighter or that he doesn't necessarily want to fight him. But what Canelo Alvarez has stated in the past is that he's not super interested in facing that of Mexican fighters. And I think that Canelo Alvarez was stating that out in a zone of respect. But what I also will say is this: Canelo Alvarez eventually, whether he likes it or not, he is going to have to face that of David Benavidez. And I think that Canelo has expressed in the past that he has a little bit of interest in fighting David Benavidez. I just think that his main goal right now is to fight that in the light heavyweight division, because I think what Canelo Alvarez's goal from even a couple of years ago was to not just unify the super middleweight division when he's seen an opportunity, but also to unify that of the light heavyweight division. And that's why I think he went after Dimitri Bivol. Now, do I believe that Canelo Alvarez more than likely is going to achieve that goal of unifying the light heavyweight division? No, I don't. I don't think that he'll beat Dimitri Bivol in a rematch, especially at 175 pounds. And I certainly don't think he'll beat Artur Beterbiev. Those guys are both really decently elite fighters. And on top of that, they're just too big. Canelo Alvarez, even for how greatly talented and skilled of a fighter that he is, how complete of a fighter he is, certain fighters, they have their limitations, especially with the weight class. It just is what it is. Especially when you're going from middleweight to super middleweight to light heavyweight. Those are big weight differences. At least they can be.
another thing, when Canelo, the leader, says these things, no matter how cockamamie it sounds, his legion of fans, his loyals, the Canelo Man fans, the Cinnabons, they just regurgitate and spew whatever nonsense Canelo is spewing. Canelo could fight a baby.
Right, just like you with Gervonta Tank Davis, just like you with overall Deontay Wilder, and just like you with a multitude of other fighters that you like. So let's stop fucking around here. All right, let's stop playing the I'm so righteous and I'm just this unbiased dude. And don't get me wrong. Once again, I don't think Boxing Ego is a bad analyzer. I think that a lot of the times he brings up some good points. But let's also be real. He likes to call the Canelo Alvarez fans, Papi Muñeños and all this other shit. And, say that, they're Canelo Alvarez lovers. Dude, you were one of the main defenders of Deontay Wilder when he was on his bullshit about claiming all this cheating shit. You still claim that Tyson Fury cheated in the fight, and you have no goddamn evidence whatsoever. And then Gervonta Tank Davis, he can fight these repeated bums I don't give a shit what anybody says. He's fighting bums, and Hector Garcia, Isaac Pitbull Cruz, Mario Barrios, and Rolly Romero, fighters that stand no chance with him whatsoever inside the ring. And apparently they're big fights, and apparently when people complain about that fight, it's hating. And don't get me wrong, I don't think the John Ryder fight is that great either. But it's very clear that whenever it comes to a certain fighter, ego also as well does let his bias and his motivations get in the way. That's just the way that it is.
In Mexico, and people would say if he chose it, they'll say it's a good fight. That baby had it coming, just because it's Canelo. But anybody,
Well, I somewhat agree with you, Mr. Ego, but that's just how mega fans work, and you're one of them. So once again, let's not sit here and act like you're much more righteous than anybody else. You're pretty much just like any other fan. And that's why I say a lot of these times, these channels like Dante's Boxing Nation and Boxing Ego, they love to spew you this bullshit about, how they're so unbiased and they love to tell the truth. Bullshit. They just tell the truth from their over emotional ass perspective. That's all they do. That's why they have certain standards with certain fighters. That's why they love to talk so much shit about Canelo Alvarez. They love to talk so much shit about Vasily Lomachenko or Tyson Fury or one of these fighters or Naoya Inoue or Naoya Inoue, however you pronounce his name. But then when it comes to Jamal Charlo stating that he don't want to fight David Benavidez or Demetrius Andre not mentioning his name or Deontay Wilder pulling out of a fight or Gervonta Tank Davis ducking Lomachenko for multiple years, there's no news about it. And I'm not saying that I necessarily report everything either, that I've, necessarily seen, but that might be more of what I think is a little bit more interesting in circumstance. And on top of that, I don't see every single thing, but I try to, keep the same standards with everybody. I've talked about every single fighter, every single demographic of fighter, whether I thought that they were doing a bad career move or a good career move, and I've kept the same standards with everybody, whether I thought that they were bad or good. These guys, they're not logical. They're not objective. That don't get me wrong. That doesn't mean that sometimes they don't have good points, but they're fanboys. They're fanboys at the end of the day. That's what they are. They are no better. They are no worse than your average Mega Canelo Alvarez fanboy or your average Deontay Wilder fanboys. Big fanboys. They all work the same at the end of the day. You might have certain ones that are more logical than most, but when it really comes down to when shit hits the fan, they're going to get over emotional.
else would be like, "Oh, you baby killer," and all these kinds of names. But Canelo man fans, they don't want to see the truth, so they'll just go down with the ship, and that's exactly what's going to happen. Y'all about to go down with the ship. So
Well, that's what you're hoping is going to happen. And what I'm going to say is this. I don't think Canelo Alvarez is going to beat Dimitri Bivol. That's just my personal view. Now, he has more of a chance than any other 160 or 168 pounder that I see in the world. I would personally give Canelo Alvarez more of a chance over Dimitri Bivol than even David Benavidez. Because, and certain people, like I had this one guy who called me a Canelita lover, I believe. Not the first time, won't be the last time either. And he was arguing with me. He said that, David Benavidez, it's too early to say that Canelo is better than David Benavidez. I don't think it's too early at all to say that. And I think that if you know anything about boxing, that you know that it's not too early to say that. Now, you can make an argument, if you wanted to, that David Benavidez possibly could beat him. But in terms of who's the all-around better boxer, I don't see anything that David Benavidez really beats him in. I don't think he has better power. I don't think he has better speed, at least with certain counter punches. I think that Canelo Alvarez has way higher boxing IQ. I think that he has way better defense. I think that he has way better head movement. I think that if David Benavidez does beat Canelo Alvarez, more than likely it'll be because Canelo Alvarez has lost confidence or a step in his ability because of the Dimitri Bivol loss or something like that of a sort. And even after that, I would not favor David Benavidez to beat Canelo. Just my personal view.
back to the Benavidez thing. I mean, his whole team. It's just ironic. So
A fight that I really would have loved to seen would have been David Benavidez versus Gennady Golovkin. Because Gennady Golovkin would have been a fighter, and I'm talking about peak Gennady Golovkin, of course, not the shell that he's been for the past few years. Even though you can still debate maybe that he's around an A-minus level fighter. And some would even say that's debatable. I would have loved to have seen a fight between Gennady Golovkin and David Benavidez, prime v prime. Because Gennady would have been probably the all-around more intelligent fighter, but it would have been interesting to see how he would have dealt with that size. And also with the pressure of David Benavidez and whose pressure and whose ability would have got to who first.
how do you say all this stuff? Benavidez, who is he? He ain't beat nobody. And the reason they were saying this, let's not beat around the bush, and I want to be very particular and very brash in my delivery, is because Benavidez.
Now, a lot of people, when they talk about Canelo Alvarez up against Dimitri Bivol, especially these channels, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to give an excuse to Canelo Alvarez by any means. He was the pretty big favorite in that fight. He should have had a much better showing against Dimitri Bivol. But when someone is breaking down a fight like me, for example, and I say something like when I talk about the Lomachenko or the Devin Haney fight, or just a fight even in particular, whether it be the Stevan Fulton or the Naoya Inoue fight, or whatever fight we're really talking about. And certain people, depending on the fighter that they like, they say, oh, well, skills win matches, not size. Well, it's a combination of both. And you have to know that if you know shit about boxing, and it's no offense against a lot of these guys, most of these guys really don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And that's why they get a lot of their fight predictions wrong. All right? It just is what it is. Not saying that's ego necessarily, but a lot of people, when it comes to certain fight predictions, they end up mixing up because they go with who they want to win and not who they actually believe is going to win. But I remember when Tyson Fury beat down Deontay Wilder for the third time, and they were saying, man, Tyson Fury, he was like 60 pounds or, 40 pounds heavier than Deontay Wilder. How come don't anybody say that? And then when Canelo Alvarez loses to Dimitri Bivol, all of a sudden the size is an excuse. Well, which one is it? And oftentimes, once again, fanboys, they're all the same. It all depends on what fits their narrative. That's why you can't trust guys like Aki TV, Boxing Ego, and Dante's Boxing Nation. They're nothing but fanboys. They try to spread you this bullshit about overall how they're so objective and logical. They're not objective and logical. They're not objective and logical at all. And don't get me wrong, it's great that they have their own following. It's great that they have the talent for that. But no, at the end of the day, they're not logical. They're not objective. And as you see here, Canelo is even decently smaller than Caleb Plant. And Dimitri Bivol is probably about a weight class bigger than Caleb Plant. So once again, Canelo Alvarez, when I say that the size is going to be a factor in the Dimitri Bivol fight, people say, oh, are you making excuses? No, it's not really an excuse at all. It's just a factor. The power, the size, the reach, everything combined with the skills, it's all going to be a factor for Dimitri Bivol. Just like when Lomachenko fights Devin Haney, it's all going to be a factor for Devin Haney. Devin Haney's going to have the reach. He's going to have the size. He's going to have probably the all-around build. That's just how it is.
Was almost being a scene stealer. Canelo, more and more, as Benavidez began to shine on his own, his name kept getting mentioned. And as he kept calling out Canelo, and he was training in San Diego, Canelo lives in San Diego, gym in San Diego, all these things. And his name started becoming more and more synonymous with Canelo Alvarez. And that's what happens in boxing. The pressure will amount and amount and amount until it's combustible. And that's precisely what happened. And Canelo couldn't, he was also fighting a lot of English and European and Eastern European guys and Caucasian fighters and things like that. And then people wanted to change and wanted some different styles in there. Put a David Morrell in there. Put a Jamal Charlo in there. A Demetrius Andrade in there. Put a David Benavidez in there. Put a Bivol rematch in there because we know he could beat you because he beat you. So there's that intrigue based on the fact of what would happen. Can Canelo make improvements, or is it deja vu? So people,
I think it's going to be very interesting to see with the Canelo Alvarez if he can beat Dimitri Bivol in the rematch. I just don't personally think it's going to happen. That's not me saying that it can't happen, but with the size, with the confidence, with the power, David Benavidez said that he sparred with Dimitri Bivol and that he had the same level of power as a Gennady Golovkin. And for some of you that have not heard what some of the sparring partners have said about Gennady Golovkin, they said that man punches like a damn cruiserweight. Or some of them said that he at least punches like a light heavyweight. Including David Benavidez, I believe, said that. So Dimitri Bivol, like a lot of these idiots who don't know shit about boxing, they took a look at Dimitri Bivol like ego. And he was like, oh, well, Dimitri Bivol hasn't gotten a knockout in like 11 fights. You can't always take a look at that. Like Devin Haney, he doesn't get a whole lot of knockouts. But I tell you what, in terms of power, he's probably going to be able to hold his own against Lomachenko. Now, he doesn't have as much power as what Dimitri Bivol does for his weight class. That's not what I'm saying. But the point is that you can't just take a look and say, oh, well, he must not have that much power because, he doesn't have, a great knockout streak. That's not how it always is. Because, truth be told, Dimitri Bivol is probably about a level or two above power in terms of David Benavidez.
want to see Canelo in these compelling fights. And I think he resented the fact that Benavidez's name became synonymous with his. So he tried to downplay Benavidez like he's not accomplished or he's not a good fighter. And his fans did the same thing as if Benavidez isn't worthy and oh, Benavidez can't make weight. Oh, Benavidez failed for cocaine. And they had all these excuses, all that for Canelo's team, both of them, Eddie Reynoso and Canelo, to be picking David Benavidez to beat Caleb Plant. So he can't be that.
Well, I certainly agree with you with some points, Mr. Eagle, but what I'll say is this. I'm not going to go as far to say that Canelo has been ducking David Benavidez. Understandably, yes, he did take the Avni of Dirim fight, but basically, in my view, what Canelo Alvarez's goal was to unify that of the super middleweight division and then try to go up to the light heavyweight division. And I think that he thought that it was going to be a little bit of an easier task against Bivol than what he thought it was going to be, and then he was going to get in the ring and possibly unify against Artur Beterbiev. I think that's what Canelo Alvarez was planning. And then, of course, Dimitri Bivol, he upset the apple cart because he was a lot better than what a lot of people predicted. He wasn't better than what I predicted because I already knew how good Dimitri Bivol was. But at the end of the day, once again, that's going to be a very interesting fight for Canelo Alvarez because in that fight, he's really going to have to show his guts in that fight. And Canelo has showed guts before, but he's also going to have to show every ounce of boxing intellect. He's going to have to show every ounce of improvements and adjustments. Canelo, in my opinion, he really cannot step off the gas in that fight. He's going to have to pressure Dimitri Bivol the whole entire time. He has to literally try to crush Dimitri Bivol's body the whole entire night. He has to go forward. He has to go forward. Because in my opinion, Canelo being, that much smaller than Dimitri Bivol, and I'm not saying that it's the biggest size difference that I've ever seen. Canelo, of course, he can rehydrate up to, decent weight. But at the end of the day, it's obvious that Dimitri Bivol, that he still has a decent size advantage. So what Canelo's going to have to do, in my view, he's really going to have to rip to that body early on. There may have to even be a game plan to where he might have to possibly stop Bivol in order to win that fight.
Bad because you have experience. You know Caleb Plant's a good fighter, and you've never fought David Benavidez. So why are you picking him if he's such a bad fighter? Oh, that's right. He wasn't a bad fighter. He was only a bad fighter when you wanted to downplay him because
Well, Canelo never claimed for David Benavidez to be a bad fighter. All Canelo Alvarez claimed is that he's not really his number one priority right now because he had other goals in mind. At least that's the way that I took it. Canelo Alvarez never called David Benavidez or Jamal Charlo bad fighters. Now, the one that he did call a horrible fighter was Demetrius Bubu Andrade. And that is the one fight that I will agree that Canelo Alvarez has never had any interest in. And if I had to guess, it more than likely is because Canelo sees Demetrius Andrade as just too much trouble for what he's worth.
his name kept getting mentioned and people kept asking Canelo himself, when are you
And
going
that's why I've said with Demetrius Bubu Andrade. Because not all of the things that have happened to Demetrius Andrade has been his fault, but some of it has been. He's not taken certain opportunities when they have arisen or risen up to him. And more than likely, he's going to have to fight the winner of this Caleb Plant versus David Benavidez fight, at least possibly later on down the line.
fight David Benavidez? When are you going to fight David
Because
Benavidez?
Jamal Charlo is not focused on getting in the ring with anybody other than Canelo Alvarez.
So I had to make this video exposing that. So it just goes to show you there's more than meets the eye in this boxing game. You got fighters that'll downplay another fighter like they don't know who they are and what have they done and they're not on my level. But deep down,
Right, and Errol Spence Jr. has said the same thing about Terrence Bud Crawford. He said, who has he really beat? His resume is really all smoke and mirrors. Now, some people may say, well, that's a little bit different. Because Terrence Bud Crawford, with the negotiations he pulled out and blah, 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 and all sort of stuff. And you can argue that that's a little bit different. But like I said, I'm not going to go as far to state that Canelo has avoided David Benavidez. Because once again, I think that Canelo Alvarez had a goal in mind to possibly unify that of the light heavyweight division. And some people will say, oh, well, he only took that fight because he was really avoiding David Benavidez. He knew that he was going to lose, and he was just doing that because he'd rather get his ass kicked up there. No, that's what Mikey Garcia did against Errol Spence Jr. and what Kell Brook did against Gennady Golovkin when Kell Brook was avoiding Errol Spence Jr. and when Mikey Garcia was avoiding Vasily Lomachenko. Those type of fights are fights that make no literal sense whatsoever. This fight was a fight where Canelo Alvarez was favored in. So it wasn't really comparable because those are fights to where pretty much those were suicide missions. That's when you know someone is really, really ducking somebody when they move up a multitude of weight classes, because it's a suicide mission. They don't even think that they have a chance. Canelo Alvarez, in my view, he was just trying to accomplish history at the light heavyweight division. I think that he's going to go for it again. I do not personally think that he'll be successful. Not saying that he doesn't have a chance, but I give him about a 30 to 20% chance. I just think that Bivol, I just think that he's too big, too skilled, has the right type of style to beat someone like Canelo, which is a guy that can move in and out with his superior feet compared to that of Canelo Alvarez, in my view, because that is the one major flaw that Canelo still has in his game, which is flat-footedness at times. Dimitri Bivol can use his power, he can use his speed, he can use his decent defense, and he can use his great mid-range boxing and excellent defense and power to really keep Canelo Alvarez at bay. I mean, to be quite honest with you, I don't think that there's much more of a perfect fighter on earth to possibly beat someone like a Canelo Alvarez.
On the side, they know that that's not the case. And it's looking real bad for Canelo particularly. I'll make other videos about this. Specifically, is the jig is up. Canelo man fans say Benavidez and Charlo, Andrade and Beterbiev. There's this plethora of excuses as to why they don't deserve a fight with Canelo. But then Canelo keeps fighting fights that we know are lesser than those, like John Ryder or Yildirim or Caleb Smith. I mean, all these...
Callum Smith, in my opinion, once again, he was an A-minus level fighter. People can bitch, moan, and complain about that all they want to. Once again, I've already been over this. Callum Smith was one of the top guys at 168. He was a legitimate fighter. You don't have to call him an A-plus level fighter, but in my view, he was A-minus. If you put Demetrius Andrade or Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez in the ring without a Callum Smith, even today, it would hands down be the biggest win of their career.
Names are lesser known commodities in America particularly, or even if he did a fight in Mexico. If he fought Charlo in Mexico, Benavidez in Mexico, David Morrell Jr. in Mexico, you'd be putting on a better show than John Ryder.
David Morrell, in my opinion, is not ready really for anyone super duper elite yet. And even his trainer has admitted that, because his trainer, from apparently what I heard, said that he was not ready for David Benavidez yet. So the talk on David Morrell right now needs to slow down a little bit until I really see him in an elite fight.
Because they're all better fighters than John Ryder, in my opinion. And they're all...
I would agree with that.
...more complex styles for Canelo's style. So if you really...
What I'm going to say is this in terms of the complex styles. When you just talk about Jamal Charlo, I don't think Jamal Charlo is really a complex style at all for Canelo Alvarez. And I think a lot of people actually truly know that, because once again, when the Canelo, and for those of you that have been around my channel long enough, you remember this video. I reviewed a video by BOXINGEGO last year when it was thought that the Jamal Charlo versus Canelo Alvarez fight was about to occur. And then all of a sudden, these guys that claim so bad that Jamal Charlo might beat Canelo Alvarez, because allegedly he's this, the Floyd Mayweather Jr. type of style, and Canelo avoids black fighters, all this shit, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden they were saying, oh, well, Jamal Charlo, he doesn't look the same. I don't even want to see the fight anymore. People have to talk all this shit, and then as soon as when something's about to happen, all of a sudden they turn their backs on it, or all of a sudden they change their opinions. Kind of like certain Lomachenko fans, all of a sudden with the Devin Haney fight, all of a sudden certain ones have a change in opinion. It's the same thing here.
We're worried
in terms of the other styles. Andrade, I think, might provide some trouble, but in my view, Andrade, I don't really know how good he actually is. There's certain things that he does that, in my opinion, are better than Jamal Charlo, but he's also very hittable. I don't think he has the chin that Jamal Charlo has, and I think that his inexperience against truly elite opponents, I think that more than likely it would cost him in the Canelo Alvarez fight, and more than likely if Canelo was at his best, more than likely, it could end up as a decently competitive fight, could even end up 7-5, who knows. But more than likely, if Canelo's at his best, he probably would win around about 8-4, possibly even stop him.
Putting on a show, but Canelo...
And as for David Benavidez might be the most challenging out of all three of those styles, at least debatably. It's either Andrade or Benavidez out of all three of those fighters that were mentioned. Dimitri Bivol, in my view, is way more challenging than all three of them, in my view. When you just talk about David Benavidez, I think that he's another one of those Antonio Margarito styles. He does certain things better than Antonio Margarito, but he's pretty much one of those guys. He's a guy that likes to use his size, to use his weight to his advantage, because he knows and his team knows that he's the biggest guy there. They like to use that size to their weight advantage. They like to use a barrage of punches. Like I said, we're going to see truly how great David Benavidez is, not only in this fight, but when he also fights a true A-plus fighter. That's going to be very interesting. That can handle his size.
What he likes to do is say certain things and package it as if he's doing it for the fans. Like, oh, I'm taking a pay cut just so I could be here in Mexico. No, you're taking a pay cut for John Ryder, because you know in America that absolutely would not sell. So you can't put that in Vegas and expect any.
Canelo Alvarez can sell anywhere in the world. it just is what it is. Canelo Alvarez, even with certain unknown opponents, the man can still even do 300,000 pay-per-view buys. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand where Mr. Ego is coming from, and perhaps he could be right. Maybe Canelo Alvarez is thinking from that perspective. But what I also will say is this: I think that this is to take care of a mandatory defense, and I believe that he'll step in the ring with Dimitri Bivol in the rematch. You know, the rematch that these guys have been alleging for so long that Canelo Alvarez is never going to take. I never believed that. I always thought that it was the smart idea to step out of the ring for a couple of fights, fight some other fighters, and then get in the ring with Dimitri Bivol. I always thought that was the smart idea. That's the same thing that Deontay Wilder should have done with Tyson Fury, but he didn't. You know, that's what a lot of fighters should do when they get their ass kicked in the first match against a fighter. Because you need to somewhat be reborn, or you need to adjust as a fighter. You need to reflect on a loss and why you lost.
Numbers. And then the only other option would be to take it to the UK, but then you would be giving your op home court advantage. And we know Canelo's the A side. He's not going to give somebody, he's not going to make it an away game and go to UK and fight on his homeland. So he took the advantage. You know, he's the A side. He took the advantage, and that's why he's fighting in Mexico. But he's making it like he's doing it for the fans. You're doing it because you have nowhere else that doesn't put you at a disadvantage to put that fight that makes that fight profitable.
Well, I think that is certainly a part of that. Obviously, it's going to be more profitable in Jalisco, Mexico. So I understand where Mr. Ego is coming from. But anyways, I believe that that pretty much is about it for this. We're going to see really where Canelo Alvarez's career once again goes from here. I've never really been a fan of the narrative of Canelo ducking David Benavidez. I've never personally went that far. Now, do I think that Canelo is eventually going to have to face David Benavidez? Yes, I do. Unless maybe after this fight he plans to go up to cruiserweight. But in my view, the best thing for Canelo Alvarez after this would be go after Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez and Andrade. At least, you know, 2 out of 3 of those fighters at the very least. And then after that, I don't know, he can pretty much do whatever he wants. I don't really know, in my opinion, what Canelo is going to do. But if I had to guess, more than likely he is going to do that. And if he doesn't do that, then there is going to be a great amount of pressure and criticism on Canelo Alvarez. And probably deserved. Because once again, I just don't see what else you would really need to accomplish. Now, one could maybe say, well, he could try his run again at cruiserweight, maybe fight Badu Jack, and that wouldn't necessarily be a bad fight, but in my opinion, everyone does want to see you fight Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez. Those are fighters that certain people look at them as 50-50 fights. I don't necessarily, at least not with Canelo Alvarez at his best. But those are the fights that make the most sense, and those are fights that you're going to want on your record more than a Badu Jack or someone at cruiserweight, probably, at least in my view. But we'll see. We'll see, because it's not like any of those guys, in my opinion, in my view, are 100% A-plus skilled fighters. But, you know, they clearly are A-grade fighters, around the same level, you know, as some of the other contenders that Canelo has fought in the past. So, we'll see. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later, and we'll see what happens with this fight.